Have you ever noticed how the quietest moments are the ones that change everything? Not the ones with sirens or shouting. The ones where someone speaks softly, calmly, like they're asking you to pass the salt. That's how it happened with us. A Tuesday night in October, the kind that smells like wood smoke and the last of the garden. And my husband looked at me across the dinner table and said something I wouldn't understand until it was too late to ask him what he meant. My name is Lorraine. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Knoxville, Tennessee for 31 years. My husband, Walter, built that house with his own contracting company, started it in 1987, with 2 trucks and a loan his mother co-signed. By the time he retired from field work, Anderson Buell Construction had grown into an $18 million regional firm. He never forgot where it came from. He kept the original loan paperwork framed in his office, a little yellowed, behind the door where only he could see it. That October Tuesday, he made pot roast. Walter cooked on Tuesdays. It was one of those things we'd fallen into over the years without ever deciding to. He'd come home, roll up his sleeves, and I'd sit on the kitchen stool and talk while he moved around with that quiet efficiency he brought to everything. That night he made pot roast and opened a bottle of Merlot we'd been saving for no particular reason, and something about opening it that night made me think, he's in a good mood. He wasn't. We ate without hurrying. He asked me about my sister's hip surgery, whether the physical therapist had called back. He told me a joke about a plumber and a building inspector that I'd heard before, but laughed at anyway because his telling of it always made it better. And then, between setting down his fork and reaching for his wine, he said it. Lorraine, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take over the main business accounts, move everything into a joint trust under your name first. All of it. I looked at him. Walter, I know how that sounds. It sounds like you've been watching too much evening news. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes the way it usually did. It's not panic, it's caution. Some things at the company have been bothering me. Irregularities I can't quite close the loop on. I'd rather have everything clean and accounted for, with you holding it while I figure it out. Irregularities, I repeated. What kind? He was quiet for a moment, the way he got quiet when he was choosing exactly how much to say. Invoices that don't match. Vendor accounts I didn't authorize, small things on paper, but they add up. Have you talked to your accountant? Not yet. I wanted to handle this first. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. Walter had big hands, rough in the palms from years before he moved into management. You're the most careful person I've ever known, Lorraine. You always have been. If something were to happen, I'd want it with you. I almost said nothing is going to happen. I almost said you're being dramatic. Instead, I said, all right, I'll call the bank in the morning. He squeezed my hand. Thank you. Now we don't talk about it again tonight. We didn't. We washed the dishes together and watched an old Western until he fell asleep on the couch, and I covered him with the blanket from the back of the armchair, the way I had 100 times before. I went to bed thinking I'd call the bank at 9. I called the bank at 9. By 10:30, the transfer process was initiated. By noon, I had the confirmation email, and I forwarded it to Walter with a single line. Done. Love you. Don't make me regret this. He replied with a smiley face and a little red heart. I kept that message for months afterward, the way you keep things that hurt to look at but hurt worse to delete. He died 3 days later. Not at home. Not peacefully. He was at the company's main office on Thursday afternoon, late, the way he always stayed late, and his project manager found him on the floor of the conference room just after 6. Heart attack was what the paramedics said. He was 67. He'd had a minor cardiac event 4 years ago and managed it with medication, diet, the whole careful architecture of a man who wanted more years. He did everything right. They said he did everything right, and it still happened. I got the call from his project manager, a decent man named Byron who'd been with Walter for 11 years, and cried on the phone more than I did. I remember sitting down on the kitchen floor, not collapsing, just sitting. Like my body decided the floor was the appropriate place to be. The roast pot was still in the drying rack from Tuesday. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I remember being there, standing under those lights that make everyone look a little gray, and a young doctor telling me that by the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. I remember nodding. I remember thinking about the red heart emoji. I remember thinking that his reading glasses were probably still on his desk at the office. If you've ever stood in a place like that, where the world is still going on around you, phones ringing, nurses walking past with clipboards, and you're just standing still in the middle of all of it, leave me one word in the comments. Just one word. I'll know what you mean. My daughter Renata arrived at the hospital before I could call her. She lived 40 minutes away and drove fast and came through the doors, still in her work clothes, mascara already gone. She held me in that hallway for a long time without saying anything. And for those few minutes, I felt less like I was drowning. Renata had always been the practical one. Steady, composed, organized, which is what made what came next so impossible to understand. Her husband, Owen, arrived 20 minutes after her. Owen worked in commercial real estate. He and Renata had been married 6 years, and we'd never had trouble exactly, but there was always something about him that kept Walter at arm's length. Walter said once, quietly, on a drive home from Thanksgiving, that Owen counted things, other people's things. He said it the way you say something when you've been thinking it for a while and finally found the words. Owen was polite in the hospital. Appropriate. He hugged me, said the right words, stood close to Renata with his hand at her back. But about an hour in, while I was still sitting in that small waiting area they'd moved us to, he pulled a chair close and leaned forward. "Lorraine," he said, his voice low and measured, "we're going to need to get ahead of some things." I looked at him. What things? The business accounts, the property holdings. Walter had significant assets in transition, and without a proper plan in place, probate can get messy. I've already reached out to a colleague who handles estate matters. He's happy to get involved quickly if you want. I stared at him. My husband had been dead for less than 3 hours. Owen. Renata said his name quietly, a warning. He glanced at her. I'm just being practical. Someone has to be. Not tonight, she said, and her voice was firm enough that he leaned back and nothing more was said. But I watched his eyes. They stayed careful, calculating. And the word Walter had used, irregularities, came back to me like a sound in an empty hallway. We buried Walter on a Saturday. The weather was that particular Tennessee gray that feels respectful somehow, like even the sky knew to be quiet. The church was full. He'd been in that community for decades, coached a little league team in the 90s, served on the county contractors board, volunteered every other weekend at the Habitat for Humanity chapter he'd helped found. People showed up because they meant it, and that meant something to me. Owen and Renata stood beside me through all of it. Owen wore a suit I'd never seen before, dark and pressed. At the reception afterward, he worked the room like it was a networking event, shaking hands with Walter's business partners, leaning in close during conversations, laughing at the right moments. I watched him from across the room and felt something cold and quiet move through me. That evening, after the last car had left and Renata was washing glasses in the kitchen, I slipped out to the back porch. The yard still had Walter's garden along the fence, dormant now, but structured, the way he liked things. He'd planted it himself 8 years ago and kept it every season with the same patience he brought to everything. I heard Owen's voice before I saw him. He was around the side of the house on the phone. The tone was wrong immediately, not hushed like someone being respectful, but clipped and urgent. Need to move on the business accounts before she has time to get legal involved. If those transfers hold, we lose access to everything. I know what he set up. But if we file the right challenge, I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just make sure the attorney is ready to go Monday. We file first. First looks legitimate, no matter what comes after. A pause. She doesn't know what she's looking at yet. Trust me. I went back inside, washed my own glass, said goodnight to Renata, and in the morning I called Walter's personal attorney. His name was Dwight, and he'd handled Walter's business and personal legal work for over 20 years. He arrived the next day with a legal pad and wore a tie the same shade of green as the chairs in Walter's office. He sat across from me in the living room, and before he even opened the pad, he said, "I've been expecting your call. There's something I need to show you." Walter had given him an envelope 6 weeks earlier, sealed, with instructions to deliver it only if something happened. Dwight set it on the coffee table between us and didn't say anything else. I opened it slowly. One page, Walter's handwriting, the same slanted architectural print he used for site plans and grocery lists alike. Lorraine. If you're reading this, I didn't get to close the loop myself. By now, you've probably already noticed that something doesn't feel right. Trust that feeling. I found discrepancies in the company accounts going back almost 2 years, vendor payments to contractors that don't exist, billing adjustments that nobody signed off on, small enough to miss but consistent enough to matter. I had a suspicion about who, but I didn't want to name it in writing until I was certain. I needed time. You were always the one I trusted most with the things that mattered. The accounts are yours now. Keep them that way. Walter. I read it 3 times. Dwight watched me quietly. He suspected someone specific, I asked. Dwight nodded slowly. He had concerns. He'd been gathering documentation quietly for weeks. I have copies of what he'd collected. Discrepancies in vendor invoices, 2 subcontracting accounts that appear to be shell entities. The payments were small individually. Together, they totaled roughly $240,000 over 18 months. Shell entities, I said. Authorized by whom? That's what he was still working to confirm. Dwight paused. But all authorizations ran through the executive cosigner on the operations account. I sat back in my chair. Who has cosigner access on that account? Dwight didn't answer immediately. He turned a page on his legal pad. Renata was added to the cosigner list 14 months ago, at Owen's suggestion, as a family continuity measure. Walter approved it at the time without full review. He told me afterward he regretted that. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly. The neighbor's dog barked once. "My daughter," I said. "Not a question." We don't know yet how much she knew. The authorizations were executed digitally, and the access logs show her credentials. But credential access and personal intent are 2 different things legally. He leaned forward. The more pressing question right now is the filing Owen mentioned to his attorney Monday morning. You know about that? Walter made sure I'd be watching for it. He opened a folder. Owen's attorney filed a petition this morning challenging the legitimacy of the asset transfer you completed last Tuesday. He's claiming Walter was under undue duress at the time of the transfer, that you had disproportionate influence over his financial decisions due to his cardiac history, and that the transfer was executed without proper corporate board notification. My hands were still in my lap. I made sure of it. None of that is true. No, it isn't. We have the bank's authentication records, the notarized transfer documents, Walter's signed instruction letter to the bank, all time-stamped, all in order. But a court challenge buys them time and creates the appearance of dispute, which is enough to apply for a temporary freeze on the business accounts. Can they get one? They applied for it this morning. He said it plainly. A judge will review it within 48 hours. But Lorraine, we have everything we need to fight it. What I want to know is whether you're ready to. I looked at Walter's letter on the table between us. His handwriting, his careful, slanted print. Tell me what you need from me, I said. The freeze went through on Wednesday. I found out from our private banker, a woman named Sandra who'd known us for 15 years, and called me herself rather than sending a letter. Her voice was apologetic and careful. Mrs. Lorraine, I want to be transparent with you. The order covers all joint business accounts and 3 of the property holding accounts. Personal accounts remain unaffected. The challenge was filed on grounds of transfer legitimacy, and until the court reviews the documentation, we're legally obligated to comply. I understand, I said. Thank you for calling. I hung up and sat in Walter's office for a long time. His reading glasses were on the desk. I'd brought them home from the office the Monday after he died, and I hadn't moved them since. I sat there looking at them and thinking about what he'd said that Tuesday. Some things have been bothering me. He'd known. He just hadn't known how close it already was. Dwight had a contact at the company, the comptroller, a sharp, quiet woman named Frances who'd worked under Walter for 9 years and kept records the way other people keep secrets, carefully and without anyone asking. She agreed to meet us at the office on Thursday morning. Frances pulled up 2 years of vendor payment records without being asked. She spread the printed ledgers across the conference table and walked us through it methodically, a subcontracting company called Blue Ridge Site Services. No physical address, no active license in the state. No work product on record. Had received 63 payments over 22 months totaling $160,000. A second entity, Crest Valley Materials, had received another $80,000. These were approved through the operations account, she said. Digital authorization, executive access code. Renata's credentials, Dwight said quietly. Frances looked at him. The access logs show her code. But I want to say this carefully. I ran the login times against building access records. Renata wasn't always in the building when those authorizations went through. I looked up. What does that mean? It means someone may have used her credentials without her present. Her access code wasn't a biometric. It was a 4-digit code tied to the executive terminal. If someone knew it. She didn't finish the sentence. Dwight made a note. We'll need copies of the access logs and the login timestamps, all of them. Already printed them, Frances said, and slid a folder across the table. That was the moment I understood what Walter had meant by closing the loop. He hadn't been able to confirm who, not fully, because the answer was complicated enough that even the evidence pointed in 2 directions at once. I drove home alone. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The garden along the back fence was still there, still structured, still his. I thought about calling Renata. I thought about what I would say, and then I thought about the phone call from the side of the house, Owen's voice, tight and certain. She doesn't know what she's looking at yet. I didn't call. The following week, Dwight subpoenaed the full access logs and the financial records for both shell companies. The returns filed under Blue Ridge Site Services listed a registered agent at an address that turned out to be a UPS store in Chattanooga. Crest Valley Materials was registered in Delaware under an LLC with no named officers, but the bank accounts associated with both entities had a common wire destination, a personal savings account held by Owen. Dwight set the document in front of me without preamble. I looked at it for a long time. The account number? Owen's name. The routing number of a bank I'd never heard of. He set up the vendors himself, I said. That's what the evidence indicates. The shell companies were formed before Renata was added to the cosigner list. We believe he arranged for her credentials to be used remotely, likely from a device he had access to, without her knowledge. I absorbed that slowly. You're saying Renata didn't know? That's our current assessment, yes. The forensic accountant we brought in believes the credential use pattern is consistent with remote access, someone who knew the code and the system but wasn't physically present. He paused. We've shared our findings with the district attorney's office. They opened a preliminary investigation this morning. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't satisfied. I sat in that office and felt something I still don't have a good word for. A kind of grief, layered over grief. The kind that comes when you realize the person who hurt your family is also someone your family loves. The investigators moved carefully and quickly. They interviewed Francis, the building's IT administrator, and two of Walter's senior project managers, who confirmed that Owen had spent significant time in the office over the past year. Consulting, they'd been told, though no consulting agreement existed on file. When the detectives went to Owen and Renata's house on a Tuesday morning, Renata called me from the driveway before they'd even gotten inside. Her voice was shaking. "Mom, there are two detectives here. They're saying Owen." She stopped. "Mom, what is happening?" "Come here," I said. "Come to me first." She arrived 20 minutes later. She sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee the way she liked it. Too much creamer, 1 sugar, and I sat across from her and told her everything I knew. I didn't spare details. I didn't protect her from the hard parts. She was my daughter, and she deserved the truth, even when it was going to hurt in ways I couldn't fix. She cried. Then she stopped crying. Then she asked to see the access logs. I showed her. She pointed at a timestamp, a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months ago. "That was the day I had my gallbladder surgery," she said quietly. "I was in the hospital. I showed you the discharge papers." "I know," I said. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the timestamp for a long time. Then she looked up at me with an expression I recognized. It was her father's face when he was done being surprised and had moved on to what came next. "What do I do?" she asked. "You cooperate with everything," I said. "You give them everything they ask for, and you trust that the truth is on your side." She nodded. She called her own attorney that afternoon. Owen was arrested on a Thursday 11 days after the shell companies were identified. The DA's office charged him with wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing a fraudulent legal petition. The evidence was detailed and clean. The payment trail, the access logs, the bank records, the registered agent paperwork, all of it mapped to him in sequence. He didn't speak when they led him out of the building. His attorney spoke for him, briefly, something about intending to contest every charge. The detectives were quiet and professional. Dwight called me from the courthouse to tell me before the news could. "The injunction against your accounts was dismissed this morning," he said. "The judge reviewed the transfer documentation and found no basis for the claim. Your accounts are unfrozen as of noon." "And the business?" I asked. "Clear. Francis is already working with the auditors to account for the diverted funds. You may be able to recover most of it through the fraud judgment, depending on what Owen's assets look like after forfeiture." "I don't care about recovering it," I said. And I meant it, not because the money didn't matter, but because the thing I'd needed to recover wasn't money. The plea negotiation took 2 months. Owen's attorney tried several things that didn't work. In the end, Owen pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud, and the court sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison. Renata filed for divorce before the sentencing hearing. She sat beside me in the courtroom and didn't look at him once. Afterward, in the parking lot, she took my hand and held it. We stood there in the cold November air for a minute without saying anything. "Dad knew," she said finally. "He suspected. He didn't want to be wrong." "He wasn't wrong." "No," I said, "he wasn't." We walked to the car together. I drove. She looked out the window the whole way home, and I let her be quiet, because sometimes quiet is the only honest thing left. The trust was finalized in January. Dwight walked me through the documents at the same table where Walter used to do site reviews. Big table, good light, the kind of room that felt like work happening. All of Walter's assets had transferred cleanly into the family trust under my name. The business accounts were stable, audited, restored. Francis had been named Operations Controller officially, a title that was long overdue. The two shell companies had been dissolved by court order. I kept the letter, Walter's one page, his careful slanted print, in the fire safe in the bedroom closet. I took it out once after the sentencing and read it again from the beginning. You were always the one I trusted most with the things that mattered. I folded it back and put it away. That spring, I started going into the office on Tuesday mornings. Not to manage. Francis and the team didn't need managing. They needed showing up for, which is different. I'd sit in on the project reviews, bring coffee, ask questions. Walter had always said the best thing a business owner could do was stay curious. I was trying to remember how to be curious again instead of just watchful. One Tuesday in April, Byron stopped me in the hallway on my way out. He was holding a set of plans, something big, rolled up under his arm. He looked a little uncertain. "Mrs. Lorraine," he said, "we got a bid request this morning. School district wants a new gymnasium and auxiliary classrooms out in Maryville. Good-sized project." Walter had been in talks with them last fall. I looked at the plans under his arm. What do we need to make a decision? He blinked, like he hadn't expected that question. Then he smiled, the kind that meant he'd been hoping for exactly it. "About 2 weeks and a site visit," he said. "Schedule it," I said. I walked out to the parking lot and sat in my car for a minute before starting it. The garden at home was already coming back. The perennials Walter had planted, pushing up without being asked, the way things do when they've been tended right. He used to say plants have memory. I thought he was being poetic. Now I think he was just being accurate. I started the car. I drove home the long way, past the church where we'd had the service, past the diner where we used to go after Sunday morning services, past the lumber yard Walter had bought his first materials from in 1987. Still standing, different sign, same corner. I thought about him the whole drive, not the grief of it, just him. The way he laughed at his own jokes a half second before the punchline, the way he made pot roast on Tuesdays, the way he said keep it safe like a full sentence, like a whole instruction, like everything I needed to know. I got home. I unlocked the front door. The house was quiet, and this time, the quiet was the right kind. I went to the kitchen and started dinner. The garden out the window was just beginning to show green along the fence line. I stood there a moment looking at it before I turned on the stove. He built things that lasted. All I had to do was hold them. I keep coming back to that Tuesday night. The pot roast, the Merlot we hadn't been saving for anything in particular, Walter rolling up his sleeves the way he always did. Nothing about it looked like a warning. That's the part that stays with me, how ordinary the most important moments tend to look while they're happening. Walter was a careful man. Not suspicious, not cynical. Careful, there's a difference. He built his company slowly, deliberately, the way you build something you intend to last. And when he noticed the numbers didn't add up, he didn't panic. He thought it through. He protected what he could. That kind of clear-headedness in the middle of fear is something I've spent months thinking about, because I didn't fully understand it when he was alive. I thought he was being cautious. I didn't realize he was being wise. What Owen did wasn't complicated, not really. It was just patient. He found a gap, a credential, an access code, a wife who trusted him, and he used it quietly over nearly 2 years. He counted on nobody looking closely. He counted on nobody looking closely. He counted on family loyalty being a kind of blindness. And for a while he was right. The thing that undid him wasn't a dramatic mistake. It was Francis keeping meticulous records. It was Byron knowing which bids Walter had been working on. It was Dwight holding an envelope and waiting. Small, honest people doing their jobs with integrity. That's what the whole thing came down to in the end. Greed is loud in movies. In real life, it's quiet, and so is the thing that stops it. Renata is the part of this I think about most. She was used without knowing it. Her name, her credentials, her trust, all of it borrowed without permission. And when she found out, she didn't fall apart. She looked at the access logs, she identified the timestamp from her surgery, and she asked me what she needed to do. That took something real, not just courage. The kind of clear-eyed honesty that's harder than courage, because it means accepting that someone you loved was willing to use you as a tool. She faced that without looking away, and she made the right choices even when they were painful. I'm proud of her in a way I don't have the right words for yet. What I've learned, and I don't say this lightly, because I lived through the worst months of my life to get here, is that the people who survive betrayal aren't the ones who were never hurt. They're the ones who kept thinking straight when everything in them wanted to stop, who asked the next question when they wanted to sit down, who trusted the right people even after the wrong ones had done damage. Walter did that. Renata did that. I tried to do that. None of it brought Walter back. Justice isn't restoration. It's just the closing of an account that was left open. But the company is still standing. The employees are still working. The garden along the back fence is coming in again this spring without being asked. He built things that lasted. I held on to them. That's the whole story, really. That's all it ever was.